Off the top at 6, we begin with a stunning development in the double murder trial of YNW Melly.
After days of deliberations, the jury was deadlocked, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. And local 10's Joseph Ojo was at the courthouse in Fort Lauderdale with reaction. And what happens next?
And decisions ending after 3 days, with the jury not able to come up with a unanimous decision to decide the fate of YNW Melly.
Just had the mistrial called, and I need to have both of your reactions.
Obviously, we want to thank the jury for their great efforts that they've extended over this period of time. But we are somewhat disappointed that Melly is not walking out the door with us. That's all I can say for right now.
When it comes to court cases, most people think there are only two ways it can go. It can either be ruled guilty or not guilty. Technically speaking, that is true, as that's the only definitive ways for a trial to end. But there's another option, albeit one that is complicated for all involved. That third option is a mistrial. That means that the person accused of a crime wasn't declared guilty or not guilty, but that the case was so corrupted by those trying the case or so convoluted that the jury couldn't decide, and things have to start again. Quite ironically, after 5 years of waiting, that was the verdict of the YNW Melly case. We'll break it down for you, but first be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel below. Hung jury. Yeah, many people didn't see this coming, and yet that's exactly what happened. After jurors deliberated for roughly 2 days, a mistrial was declared in the double murder case of YNW Melly, aka Jamell Demons, who's accused of killing his 2 friends. On Saturday in Broward County, Florida, a mistrial was declared in the double murder case of YNW Melly, who's accused of murdering his friends YNW Juvy and YNW SakChaser in October of 2018.
A mistrial declared in the double murder case against YNW Melly. Melly, whose legal name is Jamell Demons, is charged in the 2018 shooting deaths of 2 of his friends. Broward County prosecutors say the shooting was gang-related and they were seeking the death penalty. Melly's attorneys argue the gun used in the shootings was never recovered and that Melly had no apparent motive to shoot his friends. Prosecutors will likely choose to retry the case with a new jury.
The decision came after the jury was unable to come to a unanimous verdict.
I am going to just declare a mistrial.
The term for that is hung jury, as it means that some people didn't agree with the rest, and thus everything was hung up. It doesn't usually happen in high-profile cases like this, and yet here we are. Before Circuit Court Judge John Murphy III excused the jury, he thanked them for their service. Our system doesn't work without getting people from the community to come in here and listen to the facts of the case and make these types of decisions, he said. They are hard decisions. We appreciate you gave us the time. Early Friday afternoon, following multiple requests to see evidence and testimony a second time, Judge John Murphy III read a letter asking what would be the outcome if they could not come to a decision.
After considering all the facts, jurors in YNW Melly's double murder trial unable to come up with a unanimous decision Saturday. On Friday, they asked for cell phone records and told the judge they were deadlocked.
Everyone is stuck on what side they've chosen, the letter read. After discussing an Allen charge where the judge would request the minority in the group to reconsider their decision, Judge Murphy asked the jury to go back and deliberate one more time, and if they still couldn't come to a verdict, then he would declare it a mistrial. After looking over more evidence, the jury still could not come up with a unanimous decision. That says a lot.
We are somewhat disappointed that Melly is not walking out the door with us,
as the prosecution was certain in its case, especially as they relayed closing arguments. Closing thoughts. From the start, the prosecution was doing everything possible to ensure that the people of the jury knew that even without certain evidence, they could still make a case that YNW Melly killed his 2 former friends, and when closing arguments dropped, their thoughts hadn't changed. Back when you first started here, some of you as early as April 10th, you agreed to follow the law, and the law is clear that this defendant committed 2 counts of first-degree murder. Assistant State Attorney Christine Bradley told the jury.
Jamell Demons was sitting in the back seat of that Jeep, and he was the one that fired the fatal shots that killed Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams.
The overall picture puts Mr. Demons in the backseat of that Jeep, adding, it puts him holding a gun. You don't need a murder weapon to know he committed these 2 crimes.
Investigators believe Melly and another friend then drove the car to a secluded part of Miramar, where they are said to have staged a drive-by shooting to use as a cover story.
The relatives of Demons and the 2 murder victims, Christopher Juvy Thomas Jr. and Anthony SakChaser Williams, also listened without interrupting the prosecution or the defense. You folks are going to determine this young man's fate. Attorney Stuart Adelstein, who's representing Demons, told the jury.
But Melly's defense team has maintained there are major holes in the state's case, even bringing their own witness who said Melly learned about the murders at the same time as the rest of their friend group.
There's a lack of evidence, there is a conflict in the evidence, and the evidence itself, and the investigation itself stinks.
I suggest to you folks that we have a reasonable doubt that there is a conflict in the evidence and there is a lack of evidence. While it's clear that some of the jury didn't agree that there was a lack of evidence, they also clearly didn't agree that there was plenty of evidence to move the case to a sentencing. That's the justice system as it should be. You can't always just take what the defense or prosecution is saying at their word, and thus the jury debates to see if things were explained to their satisfaction. In this case, it clearly wasn't. But that begs the question, what now? Due to the fact that a mistrial means the jury was unable to come to a definite verdict of guilty or not guilty, the prosecution can ultimately decide to pursue a new trial should they so choose. According to Miami law firm Valiant Law, the state of Florida now has 90 days to bring forth a new double murder trial against YNW Melly. If the prosecution fails to do so, Melly's defense can inform the court that the 90-day period has expired and can move to have the charges dismissed. As for Melly, he'll remain in jail for the time being. After all, he was arrested on some serious charges, and they're not the kind you can just walk out of. They're the ones that you have to wait until something definitive is decided. While Melly was shown to be happy after the mistrial statement, there's a difference between getting a mistrial and getting your freedom.
And David, do you have anything you want to say further?
I don't really have much to add except to say that the jury did pay attention. We asked them to do a lot, and they hung in there and gave it its best effort, their best effort, and it's the most we could ask of them.
And what are your next steps as far as Melly is concerned? Are there going to be any efforts to try to get him out on bond?
We're not at liberty to discuss that at this point.
What are you at liberty to discuss? Can you tell us anything about next steps?
No.
Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming.
That being said, if the prosecution doesn't go forward with another case, which likely wouldn't happen for the next few months, as they'll likely try and use the 90-day period to its max to ensure it has a case for retrial, then Melly can go free at last. But again, that's not guaranteed right now. So ironically, once again, we're in a bit of a waiting game. But while we wait, let's look at the various elements of the case that likely led to this mistrial verdict. The biggest one that the defense kept harping on was missing evidence. The first big issue was the lack of evidence that definitively tied Melly to the crime. First and foremost, the murder weapon. While the prosecution harped on the fact that YNW Melly was the only one who could have killed the two in the car that was the crime scene, they didn't find the gun on him. They searched not one but two presumed crime scenes based on the two events that were told by the suspects and the investigators, and no gun was found. Specifically, we mean where Melly and his accomplice said things happened, and where investigators felt things happened. But despite the deep search, no weapons were found. That's pretty bad, because having the murder weapon with any kind of trace or connection to the accused can sway the jury easily. But because they didn't have that, the defense simply kept bringing up witnesses to try and convince the jury through experience that it wasn't a drive-by shooting that Melly and Cortland claimed, but instead it was an inside job. Literally. Clearly these witnesses did enough, on top of their other testimony and evidence, to sway some of the jury, but not all of them, so thus the hung verdict. Now, it's possible that some argued that given the gap in the events between the murder and the victims being taken to the hospital, Melly could have easily gotten rid of the murder weapon, but that's speculation, not evidence, and that probably weighed on some of the jury too. It's important to remind you that not only was YNW Melly on trial for a double murder, but if he was found guilty, he might have been given the death penalty, something that loomed very large over this trial. So perhaps that weighed on the jury's minds as well. We'll likely not know for a while, but it was clear in the minds of a few jury members that there wasn't enough to convict of murder. But to be fair, that wasn't the only thing that might have swayed some of the jury. Prosecution misconduct. Another element of this case that can't be ignored is that there were multiple attempts by the defense to order a mistrial. The biggest example came when the prosecution allegedly harassed the mother of Melly's girlfriend, stating that she was unsafe and could potentially be deported if she didn't cooperate with them. That's a bold move and tactic, and the defense jumped on the accusations and tried to get a mistrial. While it didn't work, it definitely set a tone for things to come. And this doesn't even mention the numerous times that the prosecution tried to make YNW Melly look like a gang member, despite him not having an official affiliation or group. They even tried to use his music against him as evidence to show his intent and potential crimes. Even Snoop Dogg was brought up in defense against this accusation by stating you can do things like gang signs and not actually be a gang member. There's plenty of evidence of that, as people from Serena Williams to famous actors do signs and moves that are known as gang movements, but don't exactly equate to being in a gang. Sometimes it's just part of the culture. In fact, the defense tried multiple times to get that mistrial verdict, and while each one was overruled, it definitely planted seeds in the minds of the jury that something wasn't right here. Perhaps those seeds grew into something that was much more, and led to the doubt that resulted in the hung jury. It's truly hard to know for sure. It needs to be noted here that there haven't been any major pieces of evidence proving that the prosecution was corrupt or biased, or using unfair tactics to try and get their verdict. But if the jury felt even a little that this could be going on, then yeah, that's a problem. The other side. While we've shown you many points of view regarding why jury members may have sided with the defense, it's important to remind you that some of them also sided with the prosecution, and there were key reasons as to why that likely was. First off, the prosecution had various testimonies from the people who investigated the crime scene, and they all stated that while there wasn't a murder weapon found, the way that YNW members were killed could have only happened from within the car, and not a drive-by, as Melly and his accomplice stated. Furthermore, the defense tried to state that there was no motive for Melly to kill his rap brothers, but the prosecution proved that to be inaccurate. There were text messages sent between the three that hinted at serious tension, and that they were arguing a lot over money and credit. Not to mention the whole situation of how Melly and his accomplice were alongside their YNW members, but weren't harmed, and the only accomplice went to the hospital to get help speaks volumes of suspicion. But apparently that wasn't enough. Future unknown. As we noted, now we go into yet another waiting period. There's little doubt that the defense will take this as a kind of victory and try to push for something big to happen to end things. But the prosecution might just see this as a chance to get a different jury, and one that might lean towards their feelings and insights. Either way, this current case is closed, and now we'll have to wait for either a new one or the release of Melly. It'll be interesting to watch and see what happens. And there you go, everyone, a look at what happened in the YNW Melly case and how things are likely going to progress from here. Do you think that Melly got off lucky that he wasn't found guilty or not guilty? Do you think that the prosecution is going to try the case again? What do you think will happen with Melly if his case isn't retried? Let us know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.